480 BC, the Hot Gates of Thermopylae, central Greece. Xerxes I, king of kings, ruler of the Persian Empire stretching from India to Egypt, stood on a hillside overlooking the narrow coastal pass and studied the Greek force blocking his path. His scouts reported that approximately 7,000 Greeks held the pass, with 300 Spartans forming the elite core of the defense. Xerxes commanded an army that ancient sources numbered at over 1 million men, though modern historians estimate the actual force at 100,000 to 150,000 combat troops, plus thousands of support personnel. Even accepting the conservative modern estimates, the numerical disparity was overwhelming. Perhaps 15 to 20 Persians for every Greek defender. The Persian king had spent 4 years assembling this invasion force, the largest military expedition the ancient world had ever seen. The army included contingents from dozens of subject nations: Persians, Medes, Bactrians, Indians, Egyptians, Phoenicians, and countless others. The fleet accompanying the land army numbered perhaps 600 to 1,200 warships, depending on which ancient source one believes. This was not merely an army, but the mobilization of an empire that ruled perhaps 50 million people. The Greeks blocking the pass represented city-states with combined populations of perhaps 2 million, most of whom weren't even committed to the defense. Xerxes reportedly laughed when informed that the Spartan king Leonidas commanded the Greek force with merely 300 Spartan warriors. The Greeks had 3 days to retreat or face annihilation. No rational commander would stand against such overwhelming numbers. The pass was narrow but not impassable. The Persian army would eventually flow through like water around a stone. The Greek position might delay the invasion by a day or two, but delay was meaningless when the outcome was predetermined. The strategic calculation seemed childishly simple. 300 men, however brave, could not stop an empire. What Xerxes didn't understand as he looked down at the Greek position was that those 300 Spartans weren't merely soldiers. They were the product of the most intensive military training system the ancient world had ever produced. They were professional warriors who had trained for combat since age 7, who fought in phalanx formations that transformed individual soldiers into an interlocking mechanism of bronze and iron, who had internalized a military culture that considered death in battle the highest honor and retreat the ultimate shame. The narrow pass that seemed merely inconvenient to Xerxes was terrain that negated numerical advantage and created conditions where training, equipment, and tactical discipline mattered far more than numbers. The mathematics of defensive warfare were being written not in army sizes or resource calculations, but in the geometric constraints of terrain that limited how many soldiers could fight simultaneously, in the training differential between professional warriors and conscripted levies, in the equipment advantages that heavy armor and specialized weapons provided against lightly armored opponents, and in the tactical coordination that disciplined formations maintained while larger forces dissolved into uncoordinated masses. The 300 Spartans that Xerxes mocked were about to demonstrate that in the right terrain, with the right training, a tiny force could hold off an empire, and that sometimes the side with more soldiers is simply providing more targets for a smaller force that knows how to kill efficiently. The story of how 300 Spartans held Thermopylae for 3 days begins with understanding both the specific characteristics of Spartan military training and the terrain features that made the stand possible. Sparta was unique among Greek city-states in maintaining a professional warrior class supported by a massive population of enslaved agricultural workers called helots. While other Greek cities had citizen soldiers who farmed most of the year and fought during campaign seasons, Spartan citizens were full-time soldiers from age 7 until retirement at 60. This specialization created military capability that vastly exceeded what part-time warriors could achieve. The Spartan training system, called the agoge, began when boys turned 7 and were removed from their families to live in communal barracks. The training emphasized endurance, obedience, combat skills, and unit cohesion. Boys learned to read and write, but the primary curriculum was warfare. They trained in weapons handling, spear, sword, shield, from childhood. They learned to maintain formations under stress. They competed constantly in athletics and combat exercises. The physical conditioning was brutal, designed to create soldiers who could march 20 miles in armor, then fight a battle, then march again. By age 20, Spartan males entered the regular army and joined a mess unit of about 15 men who would be their combat family for decades. They continued training daily, practicing phalanx maneuvers, weapons drills, and formation movements. They ate together, lived together, and would fight together. The bonds created through this shared experience produced unit cohesion unmatched in the ancient world. A Spartan soldier knew exactly how his comrades would respond in any situation because they had trained together for years. The Spartan phalanx formation was the ultimate expression of this training. The phalanx was a dense rectangular formation of infantry, typically 8 ranks deep, with soldiers standing close enough that their shields overlapped. Each Spartan carried an aspis, a round bronze shield approximately 3 feet in diameter, weighing 15–20 pounds. The shield was held by a bronze armband and gripped at the rim, leaving the left side of the body protected, while the right side was covered by the adjacent soldier's shield. This interlocking shield wall created a moving fortress. The primary weapon was the dory, a spear, approximately 7 to 9 feet long, with an iron point at one end and a bronze butt spike at the other. The Spartan held the spear overhand, thrusting forward from behind the shield wall. If the spear broke, the butt spike could be used, or the soldier would draw his xyphos, a short iron sword approximately 20 inches long, designed for stabbing rather than slashing. The entire weapons system was optimized for formation combat, where maintaining the shield wall mattered more than individual combat prowess. The armor completed the defensive system. Spartans wore bronze cuirasses protecting the torso, bronze greaves protecting the shins, and bronze helmets, the distinctive Corinthian style that covered the entire head except for a T-shaped opening for eyes and mouth. The total weight of armor, shield, weapons, and supplies was approximately 60–70 pounds. Maintaining formation while wearing this weight required strength and endurance developed through years of training. The contrast with Persian forces was stark. The Persian Empire fielded diverse military contingents with varying equipment and training levels. The elite corps was the Immortals, 10,000 Persian and Median infantry, named because the unit was kept at exactly 10,000 strength, with casualties immediately replaced. The Immortals were professional soldiers with good equipment, but most Persian forces were levied troops from subject peoples with minimal training and equipment ranging from adequate to primitive. Persian infantry typically wore fabric or leather armor rather than bronze. They carried lighter shields of wicker or wood faced with hide. Their primary weapons were bows, javelins, and short spears. The Persian tactical doctrine emphasized archery and mobility rather than close-quarters formation fighting. Persian forces excelled in open terrain, where they could use their cavalry, shower enemies with arrows from distance, and envelop opponents through superior numbers. They were not optimized for pushing through a narrow pass against an interlocked shield wall of heavily armored infantry. The terrain at Thermopylae transformed these equipment and training differences into decisive tactical advantages for the Greeks. Thermopylae, Hot Gates in Greek, named for nearby hot springs, was a coastal pass between the mountains and the sea. In 480 BC, the pass was extremely narrow, perhaps 100 feet wide at its narrowest point, though the exact width is debated because coastal geography has changed over 2,500 years due to sediment deposition. The mountains on one side were steep and considered impassable by large forces. The sea on the other side prevented flanking. Any army traveling south through central Greece had to pass through this bottleneck. The narrow width meant that only a limited number of soldiers could fight simultaneously, regardless of total army size. If the pass was 100 feet wide and each soldier in the phalanx occupied roughly 3 feet of frontage, the Greek line could be about 33 men wide. Behind these front-rank fighters stood 7 more ranks in the standard 8-deep phalanx formation. The total number of Greeks actively engaged at any moment was perhaps 250 and 300 soldiers in the phalanx itself. The Persians, despite having 100,000-plus soldiers, could only bring enough men into contact with the Greek line to match the width of the pass, also about 33 soldiers in their front rank. This geometric constraint negated Persian numerical superiority almost completely. Xerxes could rotate fresh troops into the fight continuously while Greeks tired, but at any given moment, the actual combat was between roughly equal numbers. The Persians couldn't use their cavalry effectively in the narrow pass. They couldn't envelop the Greek flanks because the terrain prevented it. They couldn't shower the Greeks with arrows from distance because the Greeks stood behind their shields, and the pass width limited how many archers could shoot simultaneously. The terrain forced the battle to be fought exactly as the Greeks preferred, shield wall against direct frontal assault. The Greek defensive position was further strengthened by a pre-existing stone wall, the Phocian Wall, that had been built across the pass years earlier and was hastily rebuilt by the Greek defenders. This wall, perhaps 6 to 8 feet high, provided additional defensive advantage. The Greeks fought with the wall at their backs, using it to anchor their flanks and prevent infiltration. Persians attempting to attack had to climb over or break through the wall, while Greek spears thrust from behind shields. King Leonidas of Sparta commanded the Greek force. He was approximately 50 years old in 480 BC, from the senior of Sparta's 2 royal families, a veteran of decades of combat. He had brought 300 Spartans chosen specifically for this mission. Ancient sources, particularly Herodotus writing a few decades after the battle, claim Leonidas selected men who already had sons, ensuring their family lines would continue. This suggests Leonidas anticipated the mission might be one way. The 300 Spartans were supplemented by approximately 700 Thespian hoplites, several hundred Thebans, and contingents from other Greek cities, bringing the total force to roughly 7,000 men. The strategy was to hold the pass long enough for the rest of Greece to mobilize defenses. The Greek city-states were celebrating a religious festival and Olympic Games when news arrived of the Persian advance. Most Greek soldiers were dispersed at home rather than mobilized with their units. The defense at Thermopylae was a delaying action, buying time for the main Greek armies to assemble at more defensible positions further south. Everyone involved understood this was a holding action, not a decisive battle. The question was how long 7,000 Greeks could delay 100,000-plus Persians. The battle began when Xerxes, having waited 4 days for the Greeks to retreat voluntarily, ordered an attack. The Persian king had sent cavalry and infantry to scout the Greek position. The scouts reported seeing Spartans exercising and combing their hair outside the wall, behavior that seemed incomprehensibly casual to the Persians. A Greek exile serving Xerxes explained that Spartans prepared their hair before battle as ritual preparation for death. Xerxes found this explanation more confusing than enlightening. The first Persian attacks came from Median and Scythian infantry, subject troops from what is now Iran. These forces advanced into the pass in large columns, expecting their numbers to overwhelm the small Greek force. What happened instead was systematic slaughter. As the Persians advanced, the Greek phalanx moved forward to meet them. The moment of contact was decisive and one-sided. The Persian infantry wore light armor that provided minimal protection against Greek spears. The Greek dory, thrust from behind an interlocked shield wall by warriors who had trained their entire lives in this specific combat technique, penetrated Persian armor and shields easily. The bronze Spartan shield wall was effectively impenetrable to Persian weapons. Persian spears were shorter and couldn't reach past the Greek shields. Persian swords couldn't penetrate Greek bronze armor. Persian soldiers found themselves pushed up against Greek shields, with Greek spear points coming at them from behind that bronze wall, with no effective way to fight back. The Persian soldiers tried to use their primary advantage, numbers, by pressing forward with masses of men, but the narrow pass prevented them from bringing enough force to bear simultaneously. The Greeks held formation, shields locked, spears thrusting. The front rank of Persians would die, their bodies creating obstacles for the second rank trying to push forward, and those would die in turn. The disciplined cohesion of the Spartan phalanx maintained the shield wall even as individual soldiers tired or were wounded. Fresh Greek soldiers from the rear ranks rotated forward as needed. Herodotus describes the slaughter. The Lacedaemonians fought memorably, showing themselves skilled fighters among unskilled on many occasions, as when they would turn their backs and feign flight. The barbarians would see them fleeing and pursue with shouting and clamor, but when the Lacedaemonians were overtaken, they would turn to face the barbarians and overthrow innumerable Persians. This describes a tactical maneuver where the Spartans would fake retreat, drawing Persians forward into the pass, then turn and attack the disordered pursuers. The tactical sophistication of this maneuver reveals the training differential. The Spartans could fake a retreat, a movement that required discipline and coordination to prevent actual rout, then turn in unison and reform the phalanx instantly. Persian forces couldn't execute such coordinated maneuvers. When they pursued what they thought was a fleeing enemy, they became disordered and then faced a reformed phalanx that slaughtered them while they were disorganized. This tactical control, possible only through intensive training and unit cohesion, multiplied Greek effectiveness. After the Median and Sicyan attacks failed, Xerxes committed his elite troops, the Immortals. These were the best infantry in the Persian army, professional soldiers with good equipment and training. Surely they could break through where conscript troops had failed. The Immortals advanced into the pass in disciplined ranks, their spears leveled, their shields raised. They met the Spartan phalanx with better coordination and discipline than the earlier Persian attacks had shown. But the result was the same. The Immortals were professional soldiers, but they hadn't trained in phalanx warfare. The Spartans had trained for nothing else since age 7. The Immortals wore better armor than regular Persian troops, but still lighter than Greek bronze. The Immortals' equipment was designed for the mobile warfare Persians preferred, not for pushing through a narrow pass against interlocked shields. The elite Persian troops died like the conscripts before them, unable to break the Greek formation, unable to match the training and equipment advantages the Greeks possessed in this specific terrain. By the end of the first day, thousands of Persian soldiers had died. The ground before the Greek position was reportedly covered with bodies. Persian morale suffered as troops realized the Greeks couldn't be overwhelmed through direct assault. The narrow pass that had seemed merely inconvenient revealed itself as a death trap, where numerical advantage meant nothing and where each rotation of fresh troops into the fight simply provided more targets for Greek spears. Xerxes watched the disaster unfold from his throne, set up on a hillside overlooking the battle. Ancient sources claim he jumped from his throne 3 times in alarm at what he was witnessing. The invasion of Greece, prepared for 4 years at enormous cost, was being stopped by a force that represented perhaps 0.005% of his army's size. The mathematical impossibility of the situation, that 300 Spartans and their allies were holding off an empire, contradicted everything about warfare and military power. The second day repeated the first. Xerxes ordered renewed attacks, rotating fresh troops into the assault continuously. The Persians tried different approaches: massed charges, attempts to climb over the bodies of fallen comrades to reach the Greek line, concentrated attacks at specific points, hoping to break through somewhere. Nothing worked. The Greek phalanx held. More thousands of Persians died pushing into the pass against the interlocked shields. The Greeks suffered casualties, but far fewer than the Persians. The bronze armor protected against most wounds. The shield wall meant that even wounded Greeks could be pulled back to safety behind the formation. The 8-rank depth of the phalanx meant fresh fighters continuously rotated forward. The discipline maintained formation integrity, even as individual soldiers tired. By the end of the second day, the Persian army had achieved nothing except demonstrating that the pass could not be forced. On the evening of the second day, Persian fortunes changed through betrayal rather than military success. A local Greek named Ephialtes approached Xerxes and revealed the existence of a mountain path, the Anopeia path, that wound around the pass and emerged behind the Greek position. In exchange for gold, Ephialtes agreed to guide Persian troops along this hidden route. Xerxes immediately dispatched a force, probably the Immortals, to follow Ephialtes through the mountains during the night. The Anopeia path was guarded by 1,000 Phocian Greeks, positioned on the heights specifically to prevent this flanking maneuver. But the Phocians were local militia, not professional soldiers. When they heard the Persians approaching through the darkness, they didn't hold position and fight. They retreated uphill away from the path, allowing the Persians to continue unopposed. By dawn of the third day, the Immortals were descending from the mountains toward the rear of the Greek position. Greek scouts reported the flanking movement to Leonidas at dawn. The Spartan king immediately understood the situation. His position would soon be surrounded with Persians attacking from both front and rear. The defensive advantage that the narrow pass provided would disappear once Persians were behind the Greek lines. The mission, delaying the Persian advance, was complete. The Greeks had held for 2 full days, buying time for other Greek forces to prepare defenses further south. Remaining in position meant certain annihilation with no corresponding military benefit. Leonidas ordered most of the Greek allies to retreat south while they still could. The majority of the 7,000 Greeks withdrew, escaping before the Persian encirclement completed. But Leonidas and his 300 Spartans remained, along with 700 Thespian volunteers who refused to abandon the Spartans, and approximately 400 Thebans. The ancient sources suggest the Thebans were held as hostages to ensure their city's loyalty, though this is debated. The remaining Greeks, perhaps 400 men, prepared for the final stand. The decision to stay was partly strategic and partly cultural. Strategically, someone needed to hold the pass as long as possible to ensure the retreating Greeks escaped safely. A rearguard action was militarily necessary. Culturally, Spartan law forbade retreat or surrender. The Spartan military code was simple: return with your shield or on it, victorious or dead. Abandoning position in the face of the enemy was the ultimate disgrace, punishable by loss of citizenship and social death. Leonidas and his men stayed because military necessity required it and because Spartan culture demanded it. The final battle occurred on the morning of the third day. Knowing they would die, the Spartans and their allies advanced from their defensive position at the wall into the wider part of the pass, seeking to kill as many Persians as possible before the end. The phalanx maintained formation, shields locked, spears thrusting, moving forward into the Persian host. Persian forces attacked from front and rear simultaneously. The mathematics had changed. The terrain advantages were gone, and now numbers mattered absolutely. The fighting was brutal and desperate. Greek spears shattered, and the warriors fought with swords. The swords broke, and they fought with hands and teeth, according to Herodotus. The Persian forces, attacking in overwhelming numbers from multiple directions, gradually compressed the Greek formation. The Spartans fought in a circle, shields out, killing Persians even as their own numbers dwindled. Leonidas fell early in the final fight, and his body became the focus of fierce combat as Greeks tried to protect it and Persians tried to capture it. When the last Greek fell, the Persians counted their dead. Ancient sources claim 20,000 Persian casualties over the 3 days of fighting, though modern historians consider this inflated. Conservative estimates suggest several thousand Persian dead, a catastrophic loss rate for minimal territorial gain. The Greeks lost everyone who stayed, approximately 1,400 men, including the 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians, and the Thebans who didn't surrender. The Persians moved south after Thermopylae, continuing the invasion. They would occupy Athens, burning the city in revenge for the Greek destruction of Sardis years earlier. But the delay at Thermopylae had allowed the Greek naval forces to engage the Persian fleet at Artemisium and later at Salamis, where the Greek navy would destroy much of the Persian fleet. On land, the main Greek army assembled at the Isthmus of Corinth, creating defensive positions that the Persians would find difficult to assault. The invasion would eventually fail, with Persian land forces defeated at Plataea the following year. Thermopylae's significance was partly military. The delay bought critical time, and partly psychological. The battle demonstrated that Persians could be fought and killed, that the massive Persian army wasn't invincible, that Greek infantry could defeat Persian forces under the right conditions. The propaganda value was enormous, rallying Greek city-states that had considered surrendering or remaining neutral. The sacrifice at Thermopylae became the rallying cry for continued Greek resistance. The battle also established the Spartans' reputation as the ultimate warriors of the Greek world. Their performance at Thermopylae, standing their ground against impossible odds and fighting to the last man, embodied Spartan military culture and validated their claim to military preeminence. For centuries afterward, Spartan would be synonymous with military excellence, discipline, and courage. The stand at Thermopylae was the defining moment that fixed this reputation in Greek and then Western culture. The tactical lessons from Thermopylae influenced Greek military thinking for generations. The battle validated the importance of terrain in defensive operations, demonstrating that proper use of geography could neutralize numerical superiority. It confirmed the effectiveness of the phalanx formation when employed in suitable terrain by well-trained troops. It showed that infantry, equipped with heavy armor and large shields, could dominate lightly armored opponents in close combat. The training differential was equally important. The Spartans' lifelong military training proved its value against Persian forces that included many levied troops with minimal preparation. The unit cohesion developed through years of training together allowed Spartans to maintain formation under extreme stress, to execute complex tactical maneuvers like feigned retreats, to continue fighting effectively, even as casualties mounted. This validated the Spartan system of professional warriors supported by enslaved labor to free citizens for full-time military service. The equipment advantages demonstrated that investment in armor and weapons paid dividends in combat effectiveness. The bronze armor, large shields, and long spears that Greeks carried made them individually more capable in close combat than lighter-armed opponents. The weight and cost of this equipment was justified by the protection and offensive capability it provided. Other Greek city-states, seeing Spartan effectiveness, invested more in hoplite armor and training for their own citizens. The memorial erected at Thermopylae after the battle bore a famous epitaph recorded by Herodotus, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here obedient to their laws we lie." The inscription emphasized obedience rather than valor. The Spartans died not because they were brave, but because they were obedient to Spartan law that forbade retreat. This distinction was important to Spartan self-conception. Courage was expected and unremarkable. Obedience to the city's laws and military discipline were the supreme virtues. The Persian perspective on Thermopylae, transmitted through Greek sources since Persian accounts don't survive, emphasized respect for Spartan martial prowess, mixed with contempt for the Greek way of war. Persian military doctrine emphasized mobility, archery, cavalry, and using numbers to envelop opponents. The Greek preference for fighting in restricted terrain in dense infantry formations seemed bizarre and limiting. Yet the Persians couldn't deny the effectiveness. 300 Spartans had held off an empire for 3 days in conditions where Persian advantages evaporated. The actual numbers involved in the battle remain debated by historians. Herodotus, our primary source, wrote a generation after the events and sometimes accepted inflated numbers. He claims Xerxes commanded over 2 million men, which is physically impossible given ancient logistics and supply requirements. Modern historians estimate the Persian army at 100,000 to 150,000 combat troops, still an enormous force by ancient standards. The Greek numbers, 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians, perhaps 6,000 other Greeks initially, are more reliably recorded and probably accurate. The Persian casualty figures are harder to verify. Herodotus claims 20,000 Persian dead over 3 days, but this may be exaggerated. Even conservative estimates suggest several thousand casualties, a significant loss for minimal gain. The Greek casualties for the final stand, approximately 1,400 dead, are likely accurate. The disparity in casualties reflects the defensive advantages terrain provided and the equipment and training superiority the Greeks possessed in close combat. The betrayal by Ephialtes, revealing the mountain path, was remembered with infamy in Greek culture. His name became synonymous with traitor in Greek, giving us the modern Greek word Ephialtes, meaning nightmare. Whether Ephialtes was motivated by gold, by political disagreements with the Greek resistance, or by other factors is unknown. The act itself, guiding an invading army around Greek defenses, was unforgivable by Greek cultural standards. He was reportedly later killed by another Greek, though the circumstances are unclear. The Phocian failure to hold the mountain path remains controversial. The 1,000 Phocians positioned on the Anopeia path had one job: prevent flanking maneuvers. When the Persians appeared during the night, the Phocians retreated rather than fighting. Some accounts suggest they misunderstood the situation, thinking the Persians were there to attack them specifically rather than to bypass them. Others suggest simple failure of nerve when facing elite Persian immortals. The result was that the defensive plan failed not because of Spartan inadequacy, but because supporting forces didn't hold their positions. The heroization of Leonidas and the 300 began immediately after the battle and continued for centuries. Spartan society venerated them as ultimate exemplars of Spartan values. Greek culture broadly celebrated them as heroes who saved Greece through sacrifice. Later, Western culture adopted them as symbols of resistance against overwhelming odds, of military professionalism over numerical superiority, of discipline and duty over self-preservation. The story has been retold countless times across 2,500 years, each retelling reflecting the values of its time. The archaeological evidence at Thermopylae is limited because the coastline has changed dramatically over millennia. Sediment deposition has moved the sea hundreds of meters from where it was in 480 BC, widening what was once a narrow pass. The hot gates that forced armies into a bottleneck are now several hundred meters from the sea, with modern highways running through the former pass. The Phocian wall has largely disappeared, though some foundation stones remain. A modern monument marks the approximate location where the Spartans made their last stand. The strategic significance of Thermopylae was that it bought time, perhaps 3 to 4 days, that Greek forces used to prepare more comprehensive defenses. This seems minimal, but those days mattered. The Greek fleet needed time to assemble and position itself. The Greek armies needed time to mobilize from their dispersed homes. The defensive positions at the Isthmus of Corinth needed time to be fortified. Every day the Persians were delayed was a day Greek forces became stronger. Thermopylae provided that time through the expenditure of 1,400 lives. The tactical significance was demonstrating that Greek infantry could defeat Persian forces in appropriate terrain. This wasn't theoretical. It had been proven through 3 days of combat. The phalanx formation, properly employed, was effective against Persian infantry. Greek armor provided protection against Persian weapons. Narrow terrain negated Persian numerical advantages. These lessons would be applied in later battles, particularly at Plataea, where Greek infantry would defeat the Persian army decisively in open battle. The cultural significance was creating a heroic narrative that unified Greek resistance. After Thermopylae, Greek city-states that had wavered about joining the resistance were more likely to contribute forces. The sacrifice of the 300 Spartans and their allies created moral obligation. How could other Greeks not fight after such an example? The story became powerful propaganda that strengthened Greek resolve to continue fighting rather than surrendering or seeking terms. The military lessons from Thermopylae remained relevant for centuries. Alexander the Great studied the battle as an example of how terrain could multiply force effectiveness. Roman military theorists analyzed Thermopylae when considering defensive strategies. Medieval commanders remembered Thermopylae when planning how to defend passes against larger forces. Modern military academies still teach Thermopylae as a case study in defensive operations, terrain exploitation, and the importance of training and equipment in combat effectiveness. The enduring fascination with Thermopylae reflects something deeper than military history. The battle represents the eternal question of whether quality can overcome quantity, whether training and discipline can defeat raw numbers, whether a small force defending home can stop an empire bent on conquest. Thermopylae answered these questions definitively, yes, but only temporarily and at terrible cost. The 300 held the pass, but they all died. They delayed the Persians, but couldn't stop the invasion. They won the battle tactically while losing strategically. Yet the strategic loss was deceptive. Thermopylae was part of a larger Greek defensive strategy that ultimately succeeded. The delay bought time. The demonstration of Persian vulnerability encouraged resistance. The sacrifice inspired other Greeks to stand and fight. The invasion failed not because of Thermopylae alone, but because Thermopylae was one piece of a coordinated defense that included the naval battles at Artemisium and Salamis and the land battle at Plataea. The 300 Spartans were part of a larger effort that succeeded. The mathematics weren't written in army sizes or resource calculations. They were written in the geometric constraints of the pass that limited how many soldiers could fight simultaneously, in the training differential between lifelong professional warriors and conscripted levies, in the equipment advantages that heavy armor and large shields provided in close combat, in the tactical discipline that maintained formations under stress, while larger forces dissolved into crowds. The 300 Spartans that Xerxes mocked as absurdly outnumbered proved that numbers meant nothing in terrain that negated them, that professional training created capabilities that vastly exceeded what numerical superiority could achieve, and that soldiers who had internalized their training to the point that maintaining formation became instinct could hold positions that rational analysis said were indefensible. The pass that seemed merely inconvenient to Persian strategic planning was terrain that transformed military power calculations entirely. The empire that could field 100,000-plus soldiers found that perhaps 100 could engage at any moment. The numerical advantage that should have been overwhelming became irrelevant when geography prevented it from being brought to bear. The 300 Spartans and their Greek allies didn't stop the invasion, but they demonstrated that defending the impossible was possible if terrain, training, and equipment aligned properly, and that sometimes the side with fewer soldiers simply has fewer soldiers who need to be fed, clothed, and buried.